Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Chris Jackson. And what are we talking about today, Fred?
Well, I was, one of my items in my ever-increasing to-do list was to go to the site, and under resources, there's a books menu item that, or just under resources. What I did years ago is I said, what are the top 10 books if you search for reliability engineering? And so how do I figure out which your top 10? Because I don't have the publishing numbers. I don't know how much revenue each one's making. I don't have access to that data, but Amazon has what's their ranking of all of the books available on Amazon. Where does your book rank according to its, I think it's a rolling average sales of some sort, but it also changes pretty often as other books sell one extra copy in versus not, especially in reliability engineering books, is we're not selling millions a day. So the actual ranking, I tried it the first year. I searched for 10 one day. I said, I got some time tomorrow. I'll search for that. All 10 of the rankings my first day were different. So I thought, if I got to set aside 2 hours to do this, pull up the search, open each book on its own tab as quick as possible, and then look at the rankings for that snapshot. So it's not terribly scientific. I'm not going to do this every day for 2 months and then average it out or anything like that. It's just a snapshot. For other things, I just go to Google and look at where they rank in the search engine results. Are they on the first page, second page, and so on? So if I'm looking for other things in that resources part. So today I decided, well, I'm going to update the book ranking. But it got me thinking is that of the top 10 books that are on here, on my list as of today, I have probably 6 on my shelf. And actually, Carl and I wrote one of them. So it actually made the top 10. It was number 8 overall. I was hoping to do better than that. But it also made me think of, well, some of these books, I went back, I'm looking at my bookcase and I'm looking through this long list. I opened up like 200 books. And so, I like that one. I like that one. I like that one. Oh, that one's kind of crappy. Hope it doesn't rank well. It was all about how to use MTBF and exponential distribution for everything kind of book. And I hope it doesn't rank. And so on and so on. But it made me think is how much I've learned from all of these books. And a good number of them that are still selling pretty well, and others that have dropped off. Books that were published in the 80s and 90s, for example. Like Wayne Nelson's book didn't make the top 10 list, but it's been my go-to book for anything accelerated testing for decades, stuff like that. So I just wondered, you've read a few books in reliability. Is the ranking one it's a way I can measure it. But is there another way to rank order books or judge how useful they are, or that kind of stuff?
Well, I think I was reading an article, which was an interview with Chicago Cubs manager Joe Madden, and I'm pretty certain you didn't expect me to bust that one out in this conversation.
Yeah.
World Series winning manager.
Yeah.
So if he's not in the Hall of Fame, he will be. So and the thing about baseball is in many ways, it's a very cerebral sport. It's very, from a management's perspective, it's all well and good being strong and powerful and everything else, but having your mindset sorted is something that is a non-negotiable when you are trying to hit a ball that's coming your direction at up to 100 miles per hour, or not, depending on what the pitch is doing to the ball. And of course, there's a movie called Moneyball, which is based on the Oakland Athletics, a baseball team, which essentially leveraged statistics and data analysis of different baseball teams.
Pitcher, batter combinations, time of day. That was quite complex modeling they were doing.
Right. And he in his interview, and he's an older guy. He's not like he'd be one of the older managers. So he's been around. But we've always had this sort of debate in the sports industry about statistics or the analytics, as they call it.
Oh yeah, I remember way back in high school, kids would get at lunchtime they'd have the newspaper open to the sports section, looking at box scores, and they would recreate baseball games they didn't see through the box scores, and but back to all the statistics and stuff is, once the Oakland A's did that and showed success with it, saying, most of the time on a Tuesday at 4:00, this batter, pitcher, hitter thing is, swing at the fourth pitch. But once that pitcher knows that they expect a fastball on the fourth pitch, they'll do something different. So it kind of evened out pretty quick.
Yeah, but there's still, and this interview that Joe Madden was giving, he said the problem in his mind with many organizations is they're either too focused on the analytics or they're too focused on the human decision making. That is, some organizations want a manager who is all across the analytics, and that's for many owners, that's very comforting and reassuring, that level of robustness, so to speak. And other owners are all about the gut feeling. Nice. I don't want to rely on analytics. There are lots of questionable decisions managers make because the analytics say you need to do this right now. A good example is when the starting pitchers get pulled from the mound. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of discussion about that. And for those who aren't baseball savants, as a rule, a starting pitcher will pitch around 100 pitches or throw 100 baseballs before they get pulled, around about there. If they're having a bad day, if multiple home runs are being hit off them, they get pulled a lot earlier. But you're looking anywhere between the 5th and 7th innings. But that said, there are pitchers who are pitching today who have pitched perfect games, which is essentially they pitched all 9 innings because they were just in the zone, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And of course, no one gets on base. Another game is a no-hitter where no one gets on base. But there's a couple of...
Yeah, you can get on base by the pitcher walking you or hitting you or stuff like that.
Well, yeah. So a perfect game is no one ever gets on base. And as a rule, you throw fewer pitches because you don't facing as many batters. Every batter you get up that gets
sent off. Back. Yeah.
But the reason I'm talking about that is, Dave Roberts, the manager of the Dodgers, has often been accused of removing pitchers from the mound too early. And the suggestion has been is that he is listening to the analytics. People say, all right, this person needs to get off. Statistics have shown that after 93 pitches, they start losing control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is sometimes you're just on. Sometimes you can pitch 150 pitches, so to speak, because that's your day. You're just in the zone, and there's the eye test, so to speak. So Joe Madden was essentially saying he laments the fact that organizations tend to be either one or the other. And he says they need to learn how to be both. They need to learn how to empower the managers to be totally across the analytics, but also give them the freedom to say, I'm going to ignore the analytics in this case because my pitcher is just on fire. I'm not going to pull him off the mound. He's just crushing it, for example. Yep. And so where I'm going with that is that you can have lots of books which have great scores, but that might be because they explain really simply how to calculate the MTBF, which is often a meaningless metric, but readers like it because it's communicated in a very simple way, perhaps. It's just that they're being beautifully taught perhaps the wrong thing. And that little story there will drive that score up on Amazon.
Yeah. Well, the other one is that if the book gets on to 2 or 3 classes, if I check this listing just as people are before the semester, at the start of the semester, then the textbooks rank real well. It's because of that group buying. The issue I have with it is that none of these books are selling in the hundreds of thousands a year. So that one or two books selling this week will change their ranking dramatically compared to everybody else. Right. Although one good note here is when you're talking about a basic, simple book, and it's not a bad book at all, called The Basics of FMEA by McDermott. And I think there's a co-author on the second edition. It's a short little book. It covers the basics of the terminology and how to do a simple FMEA. It's the book I gave away to so many different sessions I did, just so we had a common understanding of the terminology. And here's the deal. Pre-read this, it'll take you 20 minutes. And then for the people that did read it, it really, really helped. So it ranked, it's the number 15 on the list. So it didn't make the top 10, but it was number 15. Whereas Carl's book, Effective FMEAs, ranked number 10. So Carl's tome and everything you would ever want to know about FMEAs, and it's very, very good at what it does. It covers everything, but it's also, I think, 250 pages thick. It's a fat book. Whereas The Basics of FMEA is a very small, soft paperback with maybe 40 pages in it. Maybe not even that many. It's probably only like 30 pages. There is some appetite for a more effective, well, Carl's book is called Effective FMEA, is a more comprehensive book on the topic, at least today. I guess that's the rankings I got. But back to your earlier point, though, is that none of these books do you any good if you don't actually read them and use them. And if it gives you effective information or useful information of how to solve problems or make a difference, and, putting them on a library shelf in some university library that they rarely, if ever, get opened counts as a sale, but it's not terribly useful. So I'm thinking of it two ways. Is one, you got to use it. And I don't know how to measure that. I think surveys would be one approach, but trying to get an adequate sample to do that would be pretty difficult, I think, and expensive.
Well, yeah, it's a good point. You're talking about the universities. I've just released my fault tree analysis course, which comes with the guidebook, which is hopefully people will agree is written for human beings.
Well, I think so. I really enjoy it. I find I'm spending more time reading your book than I am actually getting your course up on Ascendo. I need to work on that. Quit writing such good books.
But I remember looking at, as a reference, one of the more popular fault tree analysis textbooks out there. And oh my God, it's just, that is a very dry read, and a good number of the chapters are dedicated to the algorithms used for binary decision diagrams to rapidly and quickly come up with, execute reliability system modeling equations or formulas, I should say. And why that's important is that when you have like a nuclear power plant with hundreds of thousands of different components, it can be challenging for a computer to do all the math, to say, well, if this component's reliability is this and that one's that,
it's repair time is this, and yeah.
But and just for the record, binary decision diagrams have been shown, or binary decision algorithms have been shown to be the most efficient ways of doing the calculations. And for those who want to learn more about that, Google it in your own time. But there's not one thing in there about how fault trees are used for root cause analysis. Not one. And fault trees are one of the seven key quality tools, I believe. I could be wrong if they're not. Ishikawa diagrams definitely are, but fault trees are routinely used as a root cause analysis tool, which is a very different, in a very different way than they would be used to model system reliability. Not mentioned once in the textbook.
Well, you talked about that in your podcast or webinar on it, was that, there's one use is for system modeling, but that's for people that grew up learning about fault trees as used for system modeling. But if your first class was fault trees are useful for failure analysis, then you would probably write that book on how it's useful for fault failure analysis. And that's where your experience was. You always reached for a fault tree when you were starting a complex failure analysis system. So or a process. a good number of our tools have multiple applications. And I'm looking at this list of all these different books here, and there isn't one that says these are the many ways this particular method, like fault trees, could be used, and when and how to use them in those different circumstances. There's all kinds of books that just list all kinds of different things, HALT and ALT and FMEA and all the other abbreviations we use and acronyms we use. And they talk about how to do it in one way or another, but they rarely talk about when and why you would want to choose it. So I'm kind of broadcasting a book that I have in draft right now, which was going to be in our Harles and I's original book, but it just got way too long. There's a lot of content there. So we're working on that. What I find is it's every time I post the top 10 list on the site and promote it a little bit, I get people that go, well, where's my book on there? I says, well, on this particular day, you hadn't sold any in 2 months, so it's not on the list, kind of thing. It's my intention with it is that books are still part of our profession. There's good information in a good number of them. Some, like you said, are pretty much crap. I've run into a few of those, like the CRE prep books.
Oh God! Yep. Enough said.
Yeah, and yet I have found that I go back to some of the books that have been on my shelf since I started in this field some 30 years ago, and some of it is that I know where to find the book faster than I could type as a search to find that particular formula or algorithm or whatever I'm looking for. Or sometimes I go back and read the openings of books, the forward, or not the forward, the preamble. What's the right word for it? Introduction. If kind of a good number of books then talk about what's the big picture, where's this fit in, and what's included in the book, what's not, and where does it fit into our profession? Those kinds of things. I seem to get grounded well when I go back to those kinds of things. For the books that have that in it. But it's, my wife claims that I collect books like trophies, and I'm like, no, it's a lot of stored knowledge. Some of them have gone through a decent editor too. It's gotten worse over the years.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot aside. I remember when I was doing my dissertation, and my dissertation supervisor wanted me to break it up into lots of different papers. Okay. I was actually encouraged to say less and less in each paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I could turn what could be one paper into 3 papers just to drive up
your publishing count.
Right.
University's publishing count.
Right, which is not a million miles removed from artificially driving up the so-called statistic associated with how good a book is.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I ran into years ago is, how do you tell if a conference is cost effective? It was worth it.
If your conference?
A conference. So I was asking my boss to say, I want to go to the Rams conference. And he goes, well, what's the value in that? We're going to pay, I don't know, a couple $1,000s for airfare and hotels and all this stuff. Plus you'll be not working for 3 or 4 days. Where's the return on investment here? And it got to it's not as big a discussion when it's a $50 book, but when it's a couple $1,000s and 3 days gone, that's closer to $10,000, $15,000. This is a long time ago when I was doing this. People are getting paid more now, so it's even. But you get the idea. There's an investment in going to a conference. So how is the conference of value? And it's the same for me for a book. Is it only works? And we actually had an internal conference, and we, instead of asking participants, what did they like or not like? Were the chairs okay? Was the rubber chicken for the banquet good? Stuff like that. We asked, what are your takeaways and what did you do different when you got back to work? And then we followed up 6 weeks later and asked people, call them up and ask them, saying, hey, you said you learned this, this, and this at the conference that you wanted to apply. How did it go? And all we needed was a relatively small percentage of the people that we attended the conference to tell us that they saved $1 million, and the conference paid for itself in spades. And this was all internal. There was no proprietary, problems or trade secrets or anything else. We're all on the same team, same payroll. But by setting it up as this is only a value if you do something and make and create value out of it, what you do. If you learned an idea from another person and you apply it, what benefit arrived? Did you save time? Do you save money? All kinds of stuff. Whereas I don't see that in books very often. It's the worst are the ones written by a professor for their own class. They're just writing down their notes and in a haphazard way, or collecting their papers they published over the last decade and shoving them into a book as another way to get published. But the other ones are by practice. Like one of the best, it's perennially at the top of the list, is maintenance and reliability best practices. And I'm drawing a blank on his name, Gulati, something like that. And
yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, and Practical Reliability Engineering by O'Connor and Kleiner. Both of those tended to focus on why you do stuff, with plenty of here's some details, step 1, step 2 type stuff. More at the mindset application of it. And so I'm happy to see those books doing well. They're ranked 2 and 3 on today's list. But they regularly do well when I do this kind of search. Yet I wore out my first Practical Reliability Engineering book. I think it was edition 3. I mean, the binding just fell apart. Not saying much for the publisher.
One of the issues, with the O'Connor book, I know what you mean. I remember though reading up until the point where we were talking about how to model maintenance duration with the exponential distribution. I went, okay, I'm done. I can't. It sort of spoiled the rest of the book for me.
Yeah, no, but at that point I didn't know, and I was like, that was the go-to handbook for all kinds of stuff, and Kleiner did some nice stuff to update a lot of that stuff in the 5th edition. I think they got a 6th edition out, or they're working on it. I didn't see it in my list. Matter of fact, I should search for it. But the idea is the same with a book, is if you don't actually use it, it's just as good as a fiction novel that you read on your commute. It's entertaining if you read it, but other than that, it's not terribly useful. Although some would argue that a good fiction story, good science fiction is what sparks all of these fancy flying cars we got today, but stuff like that. But anyway, it's just if nothing else, the listing is a way to prompt people to consider getting, what books do they have, what books would, and get them out and use them is probably a way I should preface my promotion for this list. But there's a lot of topics out there. A lot of people have written books that share their knowledge with us in a pretty formatted way. And it's different than a blog post or a technical paper. A bit more big picture for most of the books. And so I'm thinking that there's a lot of valuable insights and information and how-tos and tutorials in the bookshelf. And so it's a prompt to get people to go out and use that, leverage that knowledge. Now I'm committed. I have to get this thing posted. I got the list. I got my 10 lists. So I just have to update the website. I'll be good.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite book? You mentioned a couple that were pretty bad, but let's see if it's on the list here.
I don't know. I honestly don't know if I have one, because I'm very problem centric in that, I read a book to answer a question, so to speak.
Yeah, same.
And I can't say if I had the favorite book, it would have been a book that I was forced to read as part of the curriculum for a university course, where I sort of you'd be forced to read it from cover to cover, and really embrace the writing style and the effort the authors went into explaining these topics. But of course, all those sort of books were terrible. And every other book I've read has been sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Just, okay, I need to get the answer to this question. This book, chapter 6.
Well, our technical books, the stuff for our engineering field, we tend to start with the index. So where's the section on fault tree analysis? Okay, page 216, right? Go there and you're done. It's rare that you read it front to back, unless it's a part of a class.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have picked up a handful of books on my to-do reading stack, or at least cruise through it, see if they have the fatal flaw of MTBF and exponential distribution focus. If I can't sleep, I'll pick up one of these books, and I'll be asleep in 10 minutes. But do what works. Anyway, if you're listening to this, what do you think should be on the top 10 list, and how should we go about? What's a practical way for us to figure out what's a way to rank order these, or to create a top 10 list of some sort? Any ideas on that and practical ways to do it? That'd be cool. I don't know. Maybe we should just have people take pictures of their bookshelves and see where we can see the titles, and then that's not the point, though. Having it on the bookshelf's not where the value is. So anyway, if you've got an idea, if you're listening to this, you got an idea, or if you have a book that you say this is a must-have, everybody in reliability and engineering really should have this book and use it. Those kinds of things would be great. Or if you got some comments on baseball management from our last episode. That was this episode. That was a long time ago. So we should probably wrap this up.
Baseball games can sometimes go for too long as well.
Yeah, that's true. So anyway, let us know. Head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. You can find a couple of ways to get in touch with us. Chris and I and the other hosts are available through LinkedIn and our About pages. And by this point, you know that we're wrapping this one up. So we look forward to hearing from you, irregardless of that. So I probably should mention this earlier in the show at some point. But well, thanks, Chris, for indulging me on what I was working on this morning, and some of the books and stuff that made the list and didn't, and some other thoughts about how to make this even more useful. So thanks much, Chris. We'll talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.